the late medieval church, probably not something that you are familiar with. What happens between the church between, let's say, the 1200s or the 1300s or the 1400s. So that is the kind of period that we want to uh, cover. Then the next time we'll come and look at like the last one, which is um, right before the Reformation or the contributing factors that leads to the Reformation. So that'll be the next time. So here's the late medieval church. Now the papacy reaches its peak between Pope Innocent III and Pope Boniface the Eighth. All right. So Pope Boniface the Eighth is the absolute apex of church papacy power, and it just goes on decline after Pope Boniface, and that's that. So uh, Pope Boniface the Eighth, he gets himself involved a lot in the secular disputes, in the disputes between the princes of Europe, and the most important conflict that he had, or rather the one that has the greatest consequences. He had many run-ins with many princes about different things, about how to rule their country, because he think of himself as the vicar of Christ, right? The vicam, vicariously, the term vicariously, that means you are a not to say replacement, but you are a substitute. Huh? Proxy, that's the right word. So the vicar of Christ is basically the representative of Christ on the earth. And so he Philip the Fourth, he had a problem. He had a war, he was fighting a war with the English as usual, right? And he needed to fund that war. And the church was rich, and he wanted to tax the clergy, the French clergy. But there is an exception that say that you are not allowed to tax the clergy without the consent of the Pope, right? And so the Pope says, of course, says no, and you didn't even ask for consent. And so, um, and so Pope Boniface issued some sanctions on the French king, and he issued this Unam Sanctam, this particular papal bull, that says it is absolutely necessary for salvation that every human creature be subject to the Roman pontiff. Right? You must be subject to the Pope in order to be saved. Well, of course, this um, makes it very strange for your Protestant years. That it says that it is absolutely necessary to subject yourself to Christ. But since it's the vicar of Christ, then, how can you be subject to Christ without being subject to the vicar of Christ? That kind of an idea. And since Philip the Fourth is not subjecting himself to the Pope, then he is suggesting that this person is not saved and it is fit for excommunication. So they have quite a spat for a year or two, and Boniface, he planned to excommunicate Philip, and there's this event called the Outrage of Anagni. Before Boniface was able to excommunicate Philip, Philip struck first by sending in some special forces right, to capture Boniface in his hometown of Anagni. And so he was imprisoned for 3 days, beaten, tortured, mocked. Didn't really get hurt too much, but he died a month later, probably of embarrassment. Um, uh, yeah, popes are generally older people, and so I mean, it was humiliating. So he was freed by the locals 3 days after that, um, and that shattered the mystique of papal invincibility. What kind of vicar of Christ gonna hantam, right? And and with that comes the decline of papacy power, of papal power. The corruption, the hanky panky, all of that. But then now we're talking about the loss, the loss of prestige and the loss of power. Um, so it felt more like he was a power broker rather than a spiritual leader. Yeah, the Pope. Yeah, at this point, all this thing he was Italian. The Pope. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The Pope is the Pope for the whole of Western Europe. Yeah, he was still in that time. Got Vatican, yes. But more than that, there are a lot of papal states. That means territory that is ruled directly by the papacy, administered directly by the papacy. So yeah, yeah, yeah. So he got himself he meddles a lot with regional politics. So um and it seems like Philip the Fourth could do this without much retribution from other nations, other countries. Well, he was already at war with England, so there isn't really anything you can do to the king of France. Now it seems obvious that the Pope uh, doesn't have that kind of power. You see, so that was a really bad day for the papacy, Pope Boniface. Anyhow, because he died uh, a month later, the papacy entered into what is known as the Avignon papacy. I'm sorry if I mispronounced the French. Okay. So what happened was that after Boniface died, his successor Benedict the 11th died within a year, uh, perhaps poisoned. Yeah. So under Philip the Fourth pressure and influence, the cardinals elected a Frenchman, Clement V, as Pope. And Clement V was in France. He never set foot in Rome. In fact, he moved the papal court to France, to Avignon, right under. um, so you can see that Philip the Fourth will have some oversight over what does the Pope do for the whole of Christendom. So this is called the uh, Papal Babylonian captivity, the Babylonian captivity of of the Pope, whereby no longer in Rome, but set court in Avignon. And this period lasted um, about 70 years, 68 years. So many popes, many successive popes. Bear in mind that most popes get elected when they are much older in life, and each pope may be less than 10 years or less. So we're talking about six, seven, eight popes um, that they're all Frenchmen. Yeah, and the cardinals, the new cardinals that are appointed were all Frenchmen. So now the papacy, the whole Roman Catholic uh, upper echelon, like we have a plurality of Frenchmen there. Okay, any questions? What was the question? Yeah, yeah. For this 68 years, yeah, the popes were all French, and there were external challenges at that time. The British, the English, of the British, the English and the French were fighting the Hundred Years' War, 1337 to 1453. Of course, as usual, territorial dispute. who should rule Normandy, for example. Um, they fought the Hundred Years' War, and um, and there was the Black Death from 1347 to 1351. And the Black Death, of course, also killed many priests. So that also kind of reduced the mystique of the church in the eyes of the ordinary people, where the priests, bishops, or many of them died to the Black Death, to the plague. Yeah. Um, and many of the more self-serving bishops and priests refuse to see people, right? Because they want to lock down, right, or run away, or flee and or fled, leaving the flock to fend for themselves. And so people turn to black magic, right? Spiritually, if people couldn't uh, get, overcome the problems, uh, the church can't help, so they turn to black magic, witchcraft, uh, and so there's a lot of syncretism in the way that people uh, uh, practice their faith during the period of the Black Death and the subsequent period. I believe it was a rat that brought the plague, and 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 so this was some very serious challenge in Western Europe, which also explained why they kind of didn't do too much for the Eastern friends who were under siege by the Arabs, because they themselves couldn't. It was just a difficult time, like it was just a difficult time. Yeah, so a lot of syncretism happens in the church during this period, and people became more and more superstitious. The church itself became more and more superstitious, in my opinion. So the Avignon papacy, but by and large, the popes were quite um, able administrators. The French popes, if to give them credit where credit is due, they were quite uh, uh, good administrators. But in terms of legitimacy, they were kind of held like, I think that you kowtow too much to France. For example, in the Hundred Years' War, you're supposed to mediate the war, right? But it feels like you are on the French side, instead of the English side, and that alienated the English and um the allies of the English. And so basically, Christendom, the Western Christendom, were kind of split into two: those who are pro the French Pope, France, and the allies, and those who are like, we need to return to Italy, we need to go back to Rome, um, kind of a thing. Gregory the 11th was the last of the French popes, the Avignon popes, or was he? So we'll talk about that in just a little bit. So Catherine the Siena, she wrote letters to persuade Gregory, and Gregory agreed to return to Rome. But unfortunately, Gregory the 11th died the next year in Rome. And so that started what is known as the Western Schism. The Western Schism. Yeah. Uh, she she is she is like what do you call that? So if it's a man, it's gonna be a monk. So she's like a nun. She's like a nun. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, 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 yeah. So there were a few uh prominent mystic spiritual people who were keep on urging the popes to return to Rome. And finally, it was Gregory the 11th was persuaded, died the next year. He was a French. Gregory the 11th was a French. They all spoke Latin. At this time, they all spoke Latin, and French was considered the language. French was considered like a dialect of a local dialect of Latin. Yeah, these are the Romance languages, right? Did she? I can't remember. No idea. There is a Saint Catherine. I'm not sure whether it's the same Catherine. Oh, okay. Then Saint Catherine of Siena. Then, uh, of course. How do you ordain women? Flourished. Yeah, 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 yeah. The convents. So there's the abbots, right? And then there are for the, and then there's the convents. Yeah, we will talk about that for sure. What happened? So, all right. So that ends the Avignon papacy or the Babylonian captivity of the church. And what happened was that after after Gregory the 11th died, there was a mob in Rome, all right, that demanded an Italian uh pope. Okay, enough with these French popes. Okay, the papacy has moved back. The papal court has moved back to Rome. Let's have an Italian pope. So the cardinals elected Urban the Sixth, an Italian, as pope, hoping that he will be a moderate pope, because I thought that at this time what you need is a moderate pope to heal the church. But unfortunately, at least in the eyes of the cardinals, that the Urban the Sixth was not a very flexible man. All right, he is very set on his ways, and so he alienated the cardinals. So as a result, the cardinals ran to France and elected Clement VII as Pope in Avignon. So now we have two popes. We have the Pope in Rome and we have the anti-Pope in Avignon. And so, and countries naturally take sides. Obviously, those are pro the Avignon Pope will be the French because that's in France. Okay. And French. And so if the French are for Avignon, then naturally England and Germany, England and Holy Roman Empire will be against the Pope in Avignon and will side with the Pope in Rome. And if England is for Rome, then Scotland, of course, will be for Avignon. And so parts of Italy for Rome, Naples. So those closer to Rome will be for Rome. Those further away from Rome, like Naples, to the south of Italy, would be for Avignon, and the Spanish Castile Aragon, they sided with the French, and there were some who like neither here nor there kind of a thing. And so, uh, yeah. So here's the map. We have in purple those who pledge allegiance to Avignon, right? Now, although Avignon was it was in France, but it is actually a papal property. Okay, that means the land belongs to the papacy, but still it is in France. So the French are for it. Obviously, the Spanish are for it. If the Spanish are for it, then the Portuguese are against it. Naturally, huh? It's like that one, ma. If McDonald's choose Coca-Cola, then KFC must choose Pepsi. One, I cannot. right? And then if McDonald's and Coca-Cola goes for Disney, then KFC and Pepsi must go for Warner Brothers, mah? It comes package deal. You cannot get. Yes. Huh? And big size. Yeah. Yes. Of course, these are some underlying fault lines, right? With the Frenchman and the English. The English. They were friends, right? Until the World Wars. Uh, yeah, and they're not friends now either. They were never friends, right? If if the if the British colonies, if the English colonies in uh, the 13 colonies in America, they declare independence and fight the independence war, then the French, of course, will help the Americans, right? And give them the Statue of Liberty, even at the cost of bankrupting their own country, they'll do it if as long as they can, as long as long as they can do something to England, right? So that's the kind of deal. And so, France, of course, have enemies like England and the Holy Roman Empire. So the Holy Roman Empire for um is for Rome, and so uh Northern Italy, okay, versus Southern Italy, because Southern Italy sometimes they are more Eastern Orthodox as well. You know? Yeah. So like they have that. And we have these guys, and we have the flip-floppers. Okay. Flip-floppers. And here, of course, we have the Eastern Orthodox world, and then we have the Islamic world around it. So that is the situation. Mm. Um, Germany, mostly the, yeah, as you can see, yeah. Mostly Germany, yeah. Yeah, because of Luther, Germany uh, is Lutheran. Okay, so what do we do? So this went on for decades, and we have like many popes. Okay, in two popes in Avignon, I think, and many popes in Rome. So they convened the Council of Pisa in 1409, because they say let's not have, so the cardinals got together again, alright, and say let's have a council. And this is an important thing. So remember, Boniface, from Innocent the Third to Boniface the Eighth, um, the popes were really, really powerful. They were at the apex of papal power. But now, by holding a council, and the council's job here is to figure out who should be pope right now. Okay, what do we do with this two popes kind of a situation? So that kind of like allowed the councils to assert power, right? So now the power shifts from the pope to the cardinals who can hold such council. So now there is a fight. Is it papal supremacy, or is it uh counselor authority, right? Who has the real ultimate final power? Is it the executive, or is it the legislature, right? You know, what I mean? Is it parliament, or is it the prime minister, right? Who has power? So that kind of a thing was going on. So at the Council of Pisa, they decided to depose both the Roman, both popes in Rome. At the time was Gregory the 12th in Rome, and Benedict the 13th in Avignon. Depose both of them and elect Alexander the Fifth, who died soon after he was elected, and succeeded by John the 23rd. And so, problem solved. right? We get rid of the two competing popes and we elect a new pope. Wrong. Now we have three popes. Yeah, yeah. I mean, with what authority? Because ultimately, you need to have. So this is a lesson in power, right? You can't just make a proclamation, all right? So you must have the backing of the European states. If the English and the Germans they want to recognize this person as Pope, right? What can the cardinals do? And if the French, okay, and the French are not going to surrender the Avignon Pope so easily just because the cardinals had a meeting, all right? And so there is some legitimacy to their Pope. And now we have three popes, uh, and this went on for about 10 years. This went on about a decade. So 5 years later, they said, no, 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 this is not working. And they came together for another meeting. And this time, the Council of Constance, and this is a long one. Because now we can't just talk about make a proclamation. We have to be able to execute, right? We must be able to impose the will of the council. And so they managed to depose all three popes at Constance in France. I think so, yeah. Is it not? Hmm? Yeah, that is the thing because now we have three popes, so the popes are weak, right? The reason why they became popes is because some cardinals supported them. So therefore, it becomes the the game. Germany, Constance in Germany. All right, okay. I thought it would be in France. All right. So I guess they go meet up in the middle. Avignon and Rome. So they meet up in the middle, I suppose. Yes, because it was uh, convened by the Holy Roman Emperor. The Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund, somebody. He's the one who called for the meeting. And so now what happened is that who has final authority? So on the one hand, okay, the Pope has authority. On the other hand, the cardinals have power. But then what about the secular rulers? Why is it that the Holy Roman Emperor could call for such a council? The council met under his auspices. And it seems that the other um, European states also agree to let's get this resolved. And so now popes from now on will have to play a very delicate game, right? They've got cardinals to satisfy, and you've got princes to pacify. Now you got constituents. They're not just radical constituents, and anyone can so it's a delicate power play, right? Popes can excommunicate kings, right? Kings can kidnap popes and so on and so forth. So they managed to get one of them to flee, another one to resign, and another one to just get deposed. And all three of them were gone. And they elected Martin V in 1417 as the sole pope. And that ends the Western Schism. I have no idea. I mean, like I said, I'm not a church historian. I'm really reporting very superficial knowledge that I know. What do you think of doing church leadership this way? That is a question to ask. Let's have some discussions. This is a smaller group, all right? I'm in no rush. So let's have some discussion. What do you think? Huh? Political? Kevin, you have politics? Kevin, is there a microphone for them? Ideally, okay, yeah, all right. So this is the thing that I really want to discuss. What do you think is ought to be the relationship between church and state? And how much power should the church have? So because if you think about it, right, we live in a where Christians are minority, right? So it's very easy for us to say separation of church and state. What if Christians become the majority?
Then the church will want to impose the Christian standards.
Even if it's not the church, then it will be the Christian politicians themselves, right? The politicians themselves who are Christians would want to, and would that be a bad thing?
It shouldn't be if they are true Christians follow the teachings of Christ.
Yeah, and so would you want the government to advantage the Christians in terms of allocating land for churches? Laws that are more consistent with biblical teaching?
One would expect that, just as if another faith was power,
Yeah,
they would want to do theirs.
yeah.
A bit tough.
Yeah, so it's very easy to talk about separation of church and state when you live as a minority, religious minority in a country. That it should be separate. Okay, you want it to be secular, but if you are the majority, what does it mean? Would you want it to be secular, or or would you be able to tell the difference between, because your entire worldview is Christian, right? So even when you say secular, it is still filtered through Christianity. And let's talk about church unity. So now, because say the church in Malaysia, we've got all kinds of denominations, right? So Lutherans, Anglicans, Methodists, Baptists, Presbyterians, Brethren, Assemblies of God. We've got all kinds of denominations represented. So no, there is no singular leader of the Christian church in Malaysia, right?
NECF.
Yeah, but he has no, what authority does he have?
At least to represent before the government.
Yeah, so that's all he does, right? And but if let's just say there are no denominations, we are all one church, right? Okay, wouldn't there be a leader? Wouldn't that leader be like a pope? Don't you want to have a mechanism to elect that leader? Wouldn't there be cardinals? My question is this: how would you have done it differently? That's the question. I see throughout the whole presentation, there are a lot of shaking of heads. But let's learn from history, right? Let's engage with history. Let's engage with history instead of just hearing a lecture, right? What would you do differently? The church shouldn't get too powerful. Okay. The human elements keeping. Let's talk about the church shouldn't get too powerful. All right. So let's just say there was a flood. Okay. There was a flood, and now you want to and now you want to help the victims, all right, the flood victims. Uh, the government, of course, will put out uh, do donation drive, right? Here's the bank account, donation drive. Should the church also do that? Do a donation drive? to help the flood victims?
Yeah,
Let's just say here lah.
if the government is going to be fair to all the people, then no need. No need to do a separate.
But
donation. But if there is, then the Christians are being left out.
surely the church, because you're more on the ground here, wouldn't you want to do something, or you say that, oh, this is a government's problem?
The church-
No, right? The church will do something, right? The church will do something, right? And so therefore both the government and the church is soliciting for money, right? To give. Right? Who would you donate to? Oh, right, you donate to the church. Or do you trust the government? Who would you rather trust?
All the time.
The church. Okay. Right. So you trust. So did they? You understand? You understand that? So did they? So the right? So when there's a kind of situation, so there is this politician there that you know he is corrupt, okay, upper class and lives in his big mansion, all of that, right? We're talking about medieval Europe. Okay. And we got this poor monk, barefooted, and then he's always there that guy's giving speech, all right? This guy is giving porridge, all right? And then you have money. Who do you donate to? The church, because of that monk, right? The friar over there. Well, then a lot of money is going to go there. Huh?
A lot of money should go there, but I think not much goes there now.
What happened was a lot went there. The reason why a lot went there is because the whole town is Christian. And who do you want to who do you entrust the money to, all right, that you think will more likely reach the flood victims rather than get embezzled? Right? Would it be the mayor? Okay. Or would it be your local friar? You go with the local friar. There's a problem. He's also human, right? And even if he is fine, he has people go to where the money is. People go to, right? If there's no money at the mayor's office, the rent seekers, right? The rats, they will flock to wherever the money is.
Yes.
All these courtiers, you know, they would stop being the political courtiers and then start be religious courtiers. Yeah. They have no allegiance towards people, they have allegiance towards money, right? Yeah, so then the friar can't handle the whole town himself. He needs to delegate, right? He needs to delegate to these people. And then let's just say you succeeded, right? So then you succeeded in helping the poor, in restoring order and so on and so forth, starting the hospital, and so that you will be in it for more money, right? And because you're successful in that, then people will give you more money. So then people start to pledge entire endowments to the church. Correct? Especially if they're childless. And even if they have, maybe they give half to the church or something like that. And so the church became very rich. That's the thing. Yeah. And they're not just pledging gold, right? People are pledging estates, land, you know? And so many of the monks, their job were just basically, they became property managers. Because we need a full-time guy. Because now we've got so many property, okay, we can't all pray now. You know what I mean? We need to have a full-time guy to and a team.
It's like the story you told about the lifeguard.
Mm?
When you preach, you
Yeah, the lifeguard. Yeah. It's exactly the lifeguard post, right? You know the lifeguard post story? The lifeguard post story. So there was once upon a time a lifeguard post with lifeguards on it at the beach. And so and I've been saving people regularly. And one time they managed to save some celebrity, right? And so it became national news. And so that story inspired many people to join the lifeguard post to be trained as lifeguards. And so politicians come with their mock checks, and there's a lot of publicity, and so money flows in, and people volunteers start pouring in, right? And many people become lifeguards. You can't roster everybody into the lifeguard, and we don't have enough time to train all of them either. But then now it becomes a big community. There's a lot of money. They say, "Hey, we've got so much money now. Let's upgrade the lifeguard post, okay, and make it into multi-story kind of a complex. Let's put in the uh, staff uh, um, uh, put in the pool table, right? Put in some recreational stuff. Let's organize talks. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's Wednesday is barbecue night, and, and Thursday is family day, right? And we start to have all these activities, these non-life saving activity activities, and eventually it became this gigantic thing, right? And then one day there was a ship. It um was sinking, and so the lifeguards went into action. Those were still lifeguards. Those are the actual real lifeguards. Saying went to action and rescued these people from the sinking ship, brought them ashore, brought them into, of course, this lifeguard complex that they have built. But then they were all dirty and wet and slimy and everything, dirtying the carpet. Okay, yeah. So there's some, but then those members now that used to the good life, right? Say, hey, you know what? They're dirtying our complex, these people. Okay, let's build a shed outside our lifeguard post so that any of this kind of thing is done there. All right. This is our clubhouse. So not at the clubhouse, all right? Outside the clubhouse. And so there are people who then spend full time within the clubhouse and never at, at the shed. You see what I mean? All right. And there's this institutional, they need to have BCM, they need to have AGM, EGM, and all kind of a thing. And their minutes of meetings have become 1.1, 1.11, 1.112, that kind of a thing. And eventually there will be somebody who's fed up with the situation and yearn for the good old days of the small little lifeguard post, and then they will start a new post, a new lifeguard um, club over on the other side of the beach, and this thing eventually dies its own natural death. And this new hut started, and eventually they did something, and it grew into, and then eventually the whole beach is just littered with these empty complexes. Yeah, yeah. So whenever we are poor in the minority, okay, that seems to be the case. That we are all, you plant a church, then everybody's fired up, and we go do the thing, the prayer meeting, depend on the Lord. The money is not there. So God, when is the next? How are we going to pay rent for what we pray? And we evangelize. The problem is when we succeed. Yeah, So the question here is that, yeah. Mm.
And they are surplus. Yeah, they can use the surplus to train more choirs and get other things, but eventually they have to remember the source, the original mission. What was it?
Yeah. Amen. Yeah. So how to prevent the entropy, you see? Yeah. How do you prevent the entropy? Mm. Take take us here, for example. Hmm? Mm. How do you prevent that clubhouse?
Very
So some people think that the church should always be poor.
not poor, but maybe
Perhaps small.
manageable, not superfluous.
You see, one of the advantage of a big unified church, one of the disadvantage of us small little independent, is that we can't do big projects, can we? Right? Let's just say there is a big piece of land for 30 million, and the holding will be 60 million by the end of the day. Right? If I have a bishop, okay, I can say, all right, let's buy it, okay, and prorate to the churches. Okay, how many members, how many members, how many members, how many members? First, I take the pledges, right? If you are a denomination that, okay, you can have 10,000 members, but each is 250, 250, 250, and they're all independent, all right? Then let's do this project. I'm so far away over there, look. You do lah.
That's how the big churches manage to build like this Golden Sands, the
Oh, yeah.
and the Methodist Center.
That's right. That's right. We have a Highland Center. Yeah.
See,
Yeah.
it's the advantage also.
So once you have all this land, right? I mean, don't you want to have land? Like, do you really just want to have shop lots, renting shop lots forever? So you have land if you are a unified, like again, if you are a unified entity, not an independent small little, right? Then you manage your own thing. Then you will need full-time professionals to run those properties. And then you start building schools.
And
Is it wrong to build schools?
and
No.
hospital-
And hospitals? Is it wrong to build hospitals? Well, don't you need somebody to manage it then? It becomes a full-time job. So is it inevitable if the church were to succeed? Is it inevitable? Is something because we can always shake our head at all these excesses. Okay. How could it have been done differently? It is inevitable. It's a normal progression. Right. So then here's the thing. Does the Bible, the New Testament, all right, have is of any help? Because the New Testament is always a church under persecution. A church that is a minority. It's never the majority in any circumstances. It's not the majority in Jerusalem, it gets persecuted in Jerusalem. It's not the majority in all these other cities that get persecuted in those other cities. And the first few hundred years of the church is also all under persecution. So the New Testament doesn't seem to provide a guide as to how to do church when Christians become the majority. Not just say majority in the country, even majority in the city, you don't know how to do it. So something that the church should always be a minority. But then that means what I say, that means that we shouldn't succeed in evangelism. What are we talking about? Yeah. So it is something to think through. Let's take a 10 minutes break. And then when we come back, we talk about what did the monks do in response to what they see as excesses of the church.
Excesses meaning money lah.
Like the excesses means the church exceeding what it ought to be doing. Yeah. And what are the movements that they come up with to try to bring us back to what you said, the original purpose. Okay? All right. Let's take a 10 minutes break. So this idea of just moving HQ for 70 years or something like that has deep repercussion. So now that kind of like allows some other place to have a pope. You see? And so now we have pope and anti-pope. You get rid of 2, you get 3, right?
President is set.
Yeah, the president is set. And this is also quite interesting in that we talk about how to unify the church. Okay. And one way to get church unity is actually mergers. You take 2 denominations, you talk, and then you merge the 2 denominations to become one denomination. But throughout history, every time there's a merger of 2 denominations, end up with 3 denominations. Right? There is the merged new denomination, and those who don't want to merge. So you end up with 3 denominations. So you get rid of so this is not something that is particular to the Catholic Church. It is just what it is. You give Protestants enough power, they will do the same thing and have the same problems. It's a cycle. It's like a judge's cycle. There's an up and down, up and down. So then let's talk about some good stuff that might happen at the back of that. There are the mendicants. The mendicants means the beggars. The beggars. Yeah. So the background to this is that there was a urbanization that was going on. And so as the church as urban centers grow, okay, as urban centers grow, then people are no longer in their small little villages. They come to the cities. And when you move to the cities, there's a yearning, right? It's like when you were a college student, you move to a new town, then you search for meaning of life and things like that because you get uprooted. Okay. So there was a deep spiritual hunger in the urban centers. There's exchange of knowledge and all of that. But the old Benedictine orders, remember the Benedictine monks? So they set up monks by default. Their understanding is that it started off with the desert monks, right? They ran to the desert, okay, to be away from the people. And then Pacomius says, no, we want to be away from the people together, right? So let's set up monasteries deep in Sinai Desert or in some jungle forest somewhere, right? Okay, on top of a mountain or something like that. So you build your monasteries. So people who want to then become a monk would then leave their homes, right, and go to the monastery to have the peace and quiet meditation away from the center of population. So then when you do that, you become increasingly irrelevant because you're sequestered away at the monastery, whereas real life is going on in the urban center. Secondly, because of the success of the monasteries, okay, a lot of people, they pledge their inheritance, okay, they pledge their estate to the monasteries. So now the abbots of the monasteries, in addition of being spiritual directors of their monasteries, now have to become property managers as well. So now the monks were being sent out to manage vineyards or whatever they're supposed to collect rents and stuff like that, right? So that kind of like dilute, okay, the monastic life. You see, now it becomes an enterprise. It's the same thing everywhere. Yeah. Yeah. So they came out in response to the established monastic order. So now I'm talking about what was the problem with the monasteries back then. Okay. The problem, so the spiritual okay, there is the popes and the politics. And so that the spiritual vitality part, right, were kind of like the monks were the spiritually vital, were supposed to be the spiritually vital people in Christendom. And so what happened is that they now are busy with something else. So then, in response, then the people say, "Hey, let's be monks, but let's not go to the monasteries. Here is the urban center. Okay, let's do it here in the city, and let's practice radical poverty." So all these are in response to the Benedictine monks monasteries that have gotten a bit um, uh, preoccupied with managing estates, okay, and being sequestered away and all of that. And so in response to that, they want to meet the needs, and so it kind of like doing exactly the opposite of what the monks are doing in the monasteries. So if they're in the monasteries, we want to be here with the people in the urban center. If there's a lot of wealth going on there, we want to have radical poverty here. And in order to be radical poverty, we want to practice the teachings of Jesus, we want to be disciple, we want to imitate Christ by selling all that we have, give it to the poor, and don't bring 2 bags or something like that. And they became beggars. So they will go, yeah. That's how they call the mendicants. So they are so basically to trust in the Lord that somebody will provide, kind of a thing. Yeah, very radical poverty. And and so um, the two major mendicant orders, both of them are all approved by the Pope. Okay, they're not like just out there doing their own thing without papal authority. Some of the popes also said, yeah, we need to have some um, revitalization of the church. Okay, and let's do it through this new monastic order, because the older monastic orders, are they no longer can do the job of that. So sometimes this happens in denominations as well. Once something become and I observe, right? Once something feels a bit too calcified and the bishop wants to move, the church can't do it because there's all this tradition and all these protocols and all these things. So what they will do is that they will allow somebody, all right, to go out and start something still under the umbrella, okay, but it's a completely independent work. Then if anyone kacau there, I just say, yeah, I approve that of that kind of a thing, right? So in the 80s, it was kind of like the contemporary service. There's a big denomination with traditional services, and then they will have one little corner there as the contemporary service, kind of like going right. So it seems like every denomination in Malaysia kind of have that kind of an experiment to allow some vitality to happen, because the leaders of the main leaders of church couldn't get the main body moving, you see. So that's what these mendicants are for. So there are many of these orders. The two most famous of these orders are the Franciscans and the Dominicans. So the Franciscans and the Dominicans, they have the same ideas, but very different approaches to what their goals are, what their aims are. So Franciscans, they are more spiritually oriented, at least they're more mystical type. Whereas the Dominicans are more intellectual types. Okay, the Dominicans, they focus on studying scholasticism, and fight. The Dominicans, you'll see Dominicans priests that will have OP next to the OP they have initials after the name. OP, Order of Preachers. Whereas the Franciscans, they have OFM. You have OFM, Order of Friars Minor. If you have OSC, then your Order of St. Clair. So if you are the female version, Orders of St. Clair. Anyways, so their focus is imitation of Christ in poverty, joyfully imitate Christ and live the spiritual life. And that is how they influence people. St. Francis of Assisi would say that this is attributed to him, not too sure whether he actually said it, right? Preach the gospel, use words if necessary. Lifestyle, the whole lifestyle just proclaims the gospel. But I think that makes sense in Christendom, where the culture is Christian. So when somebody is living out virtues, you will immediately associate that virtue with Christianity. But in a more pluralistic society, outside of Christendom, you are such a good person, people may think that you are of a different religion. Okay. So I disagree that in places where it's not outside of Christendom, you need to use words. Words are absolutely necessary. You can't just be doing good works in your in workplaces, in the community, thinking that by just the mere doing of good works in itself is a proclamation of the gospel. First of all, people need to notice it, and if they were to notice it, let's just say they notice it, to then associate that with Christianity. Not necessary. You understand? Is that not?
Yeah, it's the preceding.
Yeah. So Francis of Assisi says that preach the gospel, use words if necessary. Meaning to say, your life should be a demonstration of the gospel instead of your words. But I would argue that this works only in a place where everyone is Christian, at least by culture. Even if it's not by conviction, by culture, it's Christian, such that when somebody is so pious, all right, and so godly, you will immediately associate that person as a Christian, be a devout Christian, the gospel. So in St. Francis's context, that absolutely is true. But when that quote is then exported out to non-Christian lands, all right, and you start to do that, to not use words and just by your action, people would think that people may not associate that with Christianity. You see?
It's like the Chinese, some group that is very good in doing works.
Yeah.
First to go.
Yeah, in Old Town. Because they bought up half of Old Town, right? In section 1. Yeah. People would think that. You see? So I would say use words. Words are absolutely necessary in our context. For the Franciscans, for Francis of Assisi, maybe his background is so this is about, we learn something from history, but then we need to see how do we contextualize that history. So certain things seems to be true and it's really nice to hear. For example, the blood of martyrs is the seed of the church, right? Well, that was true during the Roman Empire era, whereas where the Roman Empire, the Roman religion is not set up to counter Christianity. It has its own history. It has its own it has its mythology that developed independent of Christianity. That means its theology is not created to counter Christianity. You see? But when you have the persecution comes from a place whereby it's goal is to replace Christianity, let's just say, or its goal is to refute Christianity, okay, then the persecution didn't end up as being the seat of the church, but rather it was a hostile takeover and and irrecoverable. You know what I'm saying? So all these things, just because it happened like this in one place and people make observation about that local context, right? You cannot then just take that as an axiom, universal axiom that will be true everywhere. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Okay. So, uh, so Franciscans, the Dominicans, they are so the Franciscans very popular among the people because they do a lot of work of charity. They live the simple life that gets interpreted as the godly life. I'm sure many of them are live that way because they want to follow Christ and so godly. All right. So we have people like, yeah, so it's just amazing stuff that they were doing in the community. On the other hand, the Dominicans were also doing great work by being scholars, okay, by being scholars, by being preachers, by being evangelists, refuting heresies. Remember, there was a lot of witchcraft going on, right? So there were a lot of heresies going on as well. And these people, they are learned, and so they were able to teach people the truth. So really, the Franciscans and Dominicans, they are complementary to each other. One focuses on the spiritual life, all right, and the actions, and the other one focus on the knowledge, right, the theology. So both of them are complementary in this way. So interestingly, this idea of having Franciscans that focus on spirituality and the Dominicans of focusing on um, theology, the word, right, um, are still being used as paradigms of what kind of a church this church is more of. You know what I mean? The Brethren Church, for example. Do you think we are more Franciscan or Dominican? The more Dominican, the Assemblies of God are the more Franciscans or Dominican. So it seems like we are able to categorize churches as being more Franciscans or more Dominicans. And many people have tried, hey, even in seminaries, people, history classes always discuss this, right? How do we create a balanced Dominican Franciscan church, right? That is that has the best of both worlds. Is that even possible? So that is an interesting discussion. Yeah. So when you meet a Catholic priest and he says that he is a Franciscan or a Dominican, you get an idea, right? Where does this person lean in terms of, and if the Pope is Dominican, if the Pope is Franciscan, then it will also tell you, what would be the emphasis. Let's take a closer look at Francis of Assisi. There's a rise of urban centers and the rise of the merchant class. And so people were getting richer, but also more exploitative. Okay. Urban centers. So there's a big population coming in. And so there was religious enthusiasm outside of the monastic walls, whereas the monks were sequestered away in the monastery and the priests in their churches. Okay, so who is going to minister to uh, the urban population? And so, with the blessing of the Pope, Francis of Assisi, he established the Franciscan order, and together with Clare, one of his first followers, they lived a radical poverty life. They're truly mendicants. They go around begging for food and not for more. Food, clothing, and people give because they know that if they give to Franciscans, the Franciscans will start a soup kitchen. You know what I mean? So it was great. and simplicity, joy. They live the evangelistic life. Evangelistic life means their life is the life is a gospel. Mean that like what he said or what is attributed to him. Preach the gospel, use words if necessary. Don't just talk about the gospel, but live the life of the gospel. And so that became very attractive to the people. Love for creation and animals. I was told that he preached the gospel to animals, not too sure why, but to bird, maybe practice. Sometimes I practice. Instead of practicing in front of the mirror, why not practice with a pet? So so that you can one day do it with real people, I guess. Huh? Why not? So so Christ-centered piety, meaning Christ was poor, so then they practice that kind of poor the Sermon on the Mount stuff, right? So very pious, down to earth, and focusing on spirituality, the imitation of Christ. So a lot of social work they do, right? A lot of social work, a lot of good that they did, the Franciscans. So the most famous Dominican, I suppose, was Thomas Aquinas. And Thomas Aquinas, much of Catholic philosophy today is still Thomistic. That means derived from Thomas of Aquinas. Yeah. The theology may be from Augustine, but the philosophy is really Thomas Aquinas. So his historical context was that it was a 13th century church. There was some intellectual flourishing, the rise of universities, because urban population, right? So in Paris, in Oxford, and a lot of this is because of the contact with Islamic philosophy. So after the collapse of the Roman Empire, right? So the barbarians took over, right? So education wasn't a thing anymore. Okay, so everybody go back to farming, right? So there was a sharp decline in literacy or even emphasis on literacy. Only those one or two odd monks in every town, preserve writing and stuff like that. Okay, so then with the advance of Islam, and Islam was some of the Muslims that were really interested in Greek philosophy. So they are the ones that kind of revived or preserved Greek philosophy. And it is also through their contact with the Eastern Roman Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire was still steeped in philosophy, right? Whereas the West were more interested in governance. You know what I mean? How do we govern this thing? How do we, because they have to be in charge of everything. The church in the West have to be in charge of government. Whereas the church in the East, there is the emperor who is in charge of civil government. And then, so the Patriarch of Constantinople is really more spiritual. It's really just spiritual, you know what I mean? So therefore, there was focus on spirituality and also emphasis on classical learning. After all, Athens is still, these are all Eastern Orthodox, or rather Eastern Empire lands. So with the Muslims' contact with the Eastern Orthodox, the Eastern Church, Eastern Empire, okay, and therefore they also learned the Greek philosophy. All right. So we have all these Farabi and Ibn Sina and all these guys, right? They're really good. Ghazali, right? They're really good in Greek philosophy. As the Muslims conquered northern Africa and then goes up to Spain. So then there is that contact with of the Western world, Western Europe, contact with Islam, and with it, Islamic philosophy, which is actually Greek philosophy at its base. And then, so there is and that would eventually spark the Renaissance, especially with the collapse of Constantinople. Then all those monks in Constantinople fled westward and brought with them philosophy as well. So all these things are all interconnected. And the Renaissance, it's not from nowhere. You know what I mean? So the knowledge has to travel. You lost it, it has to travel back to you. So it'll travel back to you through the Muslims and also the Eastern Orthodox, and the Jews as well. So with that renewed interest in learning in classical philosophy, so then we have the Dominican order by Guzman, which emphasizes on scholarship, and Thomas Aquinas became a Dominican monk. So his chief contribution is this systematic theology that he wrote, Summa Theologiae, and he basically synthesized all of Christian doctrines: God, Christ, Holy Spirit, humanity, salvation, church, last things. He basically had a full set of systematic theology. Not too many people write full sets of systematic theology, where he synthesizes Christian doctrine with Aristotle, with Aristotelian philosophy. Why Aristotelian philosophy at all? Well, he says that all truth, whoever utters it, comes from the Holy Spirit. Yeah, I know that Aristotle was a Christian. He said, I know that, okay? But if it's true, it's true. In the modern version, it's all truth are God's truth, right? I might be in the minority disputing it, but that's a different story altogether. It's a deeper philosophy stuff. But he says all truth, whoever utters it, comes from the Holy Spirit. 1 + 1 = 2 is not true because God made it so. 1 + 1 is 2 because 1 + 1 is 2. So they say all truth is God's truth. All truth is true because God decreed it to be true. Then you are saying that God decrees 1 + 1 = 2 to be true. God could have decreed 1 + 1 = 3 to be true. So I just find that inconceivable. So no, I don't see all truth as God's truth. Yeah, most truth are God's truth, but some truth are just true. That's my opinion. That's my opinion. Because I'm not a realist in terms of it comes to number logic. I don't think those are actually things for God to create.
All above me.
She asked, I'm just answering. Does that make sense to you? Yeah. Does that make sense? You have that? Yeah. Okay. So because all truth is God's truth, so he helped us to establish what we now call natural theology. That means it is a legitimate way to know about things about God, not just through reading of scripture, but also through observation of nature. That there are two books. There's the book of God's nature. There's the book of God's word, and there's the book of God's works. Right? So all heavens declare the glory of the Lord. So we can actually investigate the heavens, right, in order to see how it glorifies God, you see. So he has 5 ways to to prove the existence of God. Motion, things are always moving. So the reason why this thing moves is because I push it to move. The reason why I move my hand is because something pushed the hand, right? So motion must start from somewhere. So there must be the unmoved mover, which is a very Aristotelian idea. The motion must start from somewhere. Okay, the first motion, the first thing that moved must itself not be moved by something else, right? That's only logical, otherwise it just go on infinitely. So that's one way, motion. Another way is causation. So causation. So what's the cause of my existence? The cause of my existence, my parents. What's the cause of my parents' existence? My grandparents and my great-grandparents. Eventually that chain must end somewhere and must end with an uncaused being, right? So the motion, you must end up with an unmoved being. So then causation, you must end up with an uncaused being. Then the contingency is interesting, is that the reason I exist is contingent on a lot of things, on air, water, food, land, right? A lot of things that I need. in order for me to exist, parents, okay, I need to come, I don't pop up. So my existence is not independent. My existence is contingent on something else. And those things are also contingent on something else. And those things are contingent that the planets are the right way they are, the solar system, blah, 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 blah. At the end of the day, it must end up with something that is completely non-contingent on an independent being. Right? Otherwise you keep kicking the process upstairs, you will never reach the top. Okay, it is like saying that so this book right here says page 705. Page 7, the fact that it says page 775 is contingent on the fact that there was a page 704. Isn't it? All right. Which there must then be a page 703, 702. Okay. And if you go all the way, there must be a page 1. All right. And that's it. Okay. So if there's no such thing as an independent, non-contingent being at the start, it would mean that if the contingency goes on forever, it will mean that now I'm at page 702. I keep flipping. There's no page 1. Right? If there's no page 1, how do I even get to page 702? So therefore, that contingency must stop somewhere. So God must be a God who is non-contingent. The word is ase. He not per se, but it's ase in itself. God's existence is from itself. It is by itself. It is in itself. God's self-existence. Gradation is about perfection. So, if you think about an apple, the most rotten apple, okay, then I can think of an apple that is more perfect than that rotten to the core apple, a less rotten apple. Then they have a less rotten apple, then less rotten apple, right? Eventually you reach the perfect apple. So beings are also like that, right? So the morality, for example, rotten to the core, okay, then the less totally depraved person, okay, and so on and so forth until you reach some saint, isn't it? Okay, and then eventually you have to reach the perfect moral perfection. So the fact that there are gradation of perfection, okay, imply that there must be the perfect, because there will always be something more perfect. There'll always be something more perfect. There'll always be something more perfect, and this cannot go on forever. So it must eventually reach the perfect being. The fifth way that he come up with is what is it? Design. So order in nature, there's order in nature. So it must imply a designer, so the intelligent designer. So from these 5 means, he's able to say that we must have a God that was the first mover. He's himself unmoved, and he is the ultimate cause of everything. He is independent being, and he is the perfect being, and he is the designer of the universe. Very powerful arguments for the existence of God that is still being employed today. To a certain extent, yes. Yeah. Where would it not be is I find the doctrine of divine simplicity a bit suspect. Okay, so Aristotle talks about essence existence. Okay. Let's talk about a table. What is the essence of a table? A table must have. Have you seen tables with 3 legs? Okay, so it's not essential to a table. The essence means essential. Like it's not essential to the table to have 4 legs. It has to have a surface. All right, a surface, flat enough of a surface for it to act as a table. Okay, what else must it have? Must be raised. Okay, so these are the 2 things. There's a surface and it must be raised. Right, whether it's raised with 1 leg or no legs or whatever, it must be raised. Okay, and it must be has some kind of flatness to it. Then it is considered a table. All right, that's the essence of table. Now, essence is only in your mind, right? It is a concept. It's a concept. It doesn't necessarily mean that a table exists in the real world. Okay. Now, it turns out that a table exists in the real world. All right. What is the essence of a unicorn? Essence of a unicorn. There's a horn on the nose of a horse. A forehead. On the forehead, there's a nose, there's a horn on the forehead of a horse-looking creature, right? Okay. There's something to do with rainbows. Okay. Now that will be, so that horn and that horse-looking thing is the essence of a unicorn, right? It doesn't mean that the unicorn exists. Although you can specify the essence, all right, it doesn't mean it has existence. But everything that exists ought to have an essence. Does that make sense? Not so, say the existentialists. You know, the term existentialist, this philosophical school existentialist. So for the longest time, we have been Aristotelian that says that there's an essence so that we are able to say what is a good table versus what's a bad table. There's a gradation of perfection of what it means to be a table. Oh, the table must be able to fly. No, that does for it to be perfect. No. It doesn't have to be or run very fast. Does the table need to run very fast for it to be the perfect table? No, it is not within the essence of the table to be able to run. It must have a flat surface and it must be raised. All right. Then we talk about raised in such a way that not that's balanced. All right. Then that will be the gradation, the flat. How flat is it? All right. That will be the gradation of that perfection of what a good table versus what a good bad table is. A good horse versus a bad horse. What would be a good horse? Run very fast, I suppose. Strong, fast, right? Okay. I don't know whether you use horse to even if you use not to for farming horse, you would use it for carriage, right? It is also about movement, right? It's about the ability to move as fast, eat as little food as possible, and can walk as far as possible, right? Horse. Okay. Strong. Okay. Does it have to be flat? No, right? Okay. So flatness defines a table, a good table. So the essence defines a bad existence. Correct? The essence of that thing, all right, will specify whether that is a good example of that, whether the good instance of that essence or not, right? Existentially says no such thing. We exist. Okay? We exist. That's it. Don't tell me what my essence is. That means there's no such thing as a good, because good horse, bad horse, good table, bad table. Good person versus bad person. Is it the good person is the person who runs very fast? So when you talk about good person, we're talking about morality, ethics, and things like that, right? That is a good human being. A good person is a person who is morally good, morally good versus morally corrupt kind of thing. So that would be good person. So then we start to define what is a good person, right? It must be this, it must be that, it must be this, it must be that. And so we try to conform ourselves to that. And the more we conform to ourselves to that, the more we are conformed to our essence, right? And the more we're like our essence of what a human being is, then the more human we are, and the more the existentialists will say that there's no such thing as essence. There's just existence. I exist. So existence before essence. I put existence ahead of essence, right? The essentialists put essence ahead of existence, right? So I need to conform. The essence is boss. I need to conform to the boss. Existentialists say that existence is boss. I exist. Who cares about what the essence is? I get to define the essence. All right, I get to define who I am. I am who I am. No, I think therefore I am is just that you know, it's how you know that you exist. Right? Because I doubt therefore I am. That's what René Descartes was going for. I'm more of a philosopher than a historian anytime. I get more animated about philosophy. So René Descartes will say that I think cogito ergo sum. I think therefore I am, or I doubt. So because I doubt my own, because he doubt the existence of everything. He don't know whether it exists, don't know whether it exists. He doesn't know whether this table exists. He doesn't know whether anything exists, right? So then, oh my goodness, do I exist? Okay. So then he say, oh, okay, I must exist because I'm doubting my existence. Because in order for there to be a doubt of existence, there must be a doubter of the existence, and that would be me. All right. So then he starts his philosophy in I exist. Okay. Now let's see what else exists. Yeah, so that is really very existentialist if you think about it, right? That is what Akogito Ogosu means. I think that's why I'm very famous saying, but nobody knows what it means. Okay, but this is what it actually means. It means that I must exist in order for me to doubt my own existence. So let's start with uh the ground zero. I exist. Okay. Then from there, whether can I reason out whether something else exists, does God exist? So everything exists in relative to me. It really moved the center from God to the human. Although his goal was to eventually be able to say that God exists. That was his project. But then that's not the effect. The effect is that now has moved the position to now the humanist movement, the self-centeredness. So then I exist. Nobody can tell me what my essence is. Nobody can tell me what's good. Nobody can tell me. This is the same old tree of knowledge of good and evil. Okay. But now given a new name of existentialism. Kind of a thing. All right. So everything must have essence, and everything must have everything that exists must have an essence. All right. Then what is God's essence? Huh? So then Thomas Aquinas would say that if you follow Aristotle's idea of essence and existence to its logical conclusion, then God is the unmoved mover, right? So God's essence is existence itself. God's essence is just to exist. He is to be. He is I am who I am. He is just I am. So it's really taking the Exodus verse, all right, to say that God just is. God is. So God's essence is existence. He is pure existence. Pure. God is purus actus. He is actus purus. He is pure act. All right. So ACT, yeah, actus purus, pure act. That means his essence is to exist. And since existence is his essence, he has no attributes of love, righteousness, holiness, you know? Okay. So then, this is called the doctrine of divine simplicity, that God is metaphysically simple. God doesn't consist of parts. Because when we talk about the table, there are two parts to the table. There's the surface part and there is the raised platform part. The raised part and so the table has two parts. So because it is not pure act, right? Its essence of table is not just to be. Right? It doesn't necessarily have to exist, but God must necessarily exist. So his essence is his existence is his essence. And so therefore, he just has one attribute, and that attribute is to exist. All right. So God is not love, God is not holy, God is not righteous, God is not. Then why do we say, and what does the Bible say? God is all these things. So it is more like in eternity, God is like light, okay, white light, okay. But then when it comes through the prism of the world, it gets manifested into different colors. Okay, but actually all those colors are unified as one white light. It just gets diffused by the prism of the world. So therefore, when we observe God's holiness, we're actually just observing God himself. We're observing God's love. God's love is just God himself. We're observing God's righteousness. God's righteousness is just God himself. Now, that's what Thomas Aquinas says, the doctrine of divine simplicity. I happen not to hold to doctrine of divine simplicity. So that is where I diverge from Thomas Aquinas. I think that God's love is God's love. God's holiness is God's holiness. Because if this love, holiness are all due to the prism of the created order, okay, then God's holiness is God's love. God's love is God's righteousness. God's righteousness is God. There's no foundational way to distinguish them. And therefore, God's will is also not, and so because God doesn't change, so his love is always love. His love is always his righteousness is always his holiness, and his holiness is always his will, God's will. So that God's will become like always the same necessarily. So that means it is necessary for, if God's will is to create Stephen Fung, okay, if God's will is to create Stephen Fung, but God doesn't actually have a will. God's will is just God himself, right? That means, and God is necessary. He's always the same, never changes, right? So therefore, God's will is always to create me. So there isn't a world in which God doesn't create Stephen Fung. Stephen Fung is necessary. Right? Because God's will is just God himself. And God doesn't change. God's will is just God himself. So God's will will always be the same. And if it is God's will to create Stephen Fung, then mean it has always been God's will to create Stephen Fung, and it couldn't have been, and God's will couldn't have been different. God's will couldn't have been different for Adam and Eve. God's will couldn't have been different for any one of us. God's will for us is always necessary. So our existence has always been necessary. Yeah, we are necessary to God's will. So I reject that as heretical. That I'm not necessary. I'm contingent on God's will. So it's really up to God. But there's no such thing as up to God, because God's will is just God himself. So nothing is up to God. It is just necessary for God to create the world. It is just necessary for God to create you and me. It is just necessary for God's plan to be the way it is. God's plan could not have been different. Yeah. Oh, yeah, even God is predestined, right? Because God is just acting out what he is necessarily. That means God's plan must have been like this and couldn't have been different. Philosophically, it's a model collapse. There's no model universe. There's no model world. There's no modes. There's no modes. There's no different modes. There is just what is necessary. Yeah, God. Yeah, and God's will is God. Yeah. So that's it. Yeah. Also, then, what do you mean by God is metaphysically simple? If there's such a thing as Trinity, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, already we have three, and that is fundamental. You cannot reduce. It's irreducible. The doctrine of Trinity is irreducible. So how could God be metaphysically simple? And the answer, they said that, well, St. Thomas, he affirms the Trinity. Sure, he affirms the Trinity, but it feels like he's affirming Trinity against his own philosophy instead of having it harmonized. But they're working. So the big kahuna of divine simplicity in evangelicalism is Norman Geisler. Right? Norman Geisler, his big book on systematic theology. The entire systematic theology book is written from the foundation of God is metaphysically simple, and everything flows from that. Yeah. So it is so therefore it's a debate within evangelicals at least, whether is God metaphysically simple. Yeah. So the one camp says that God is metaphysically simple, very Aristotelian. They really start from Aristotle to Thomas Aquinas to now modern Christian philosophy, and there is those group that is not for the divine simplicity of God. Yeah, they will be doing something else. Yeah, what I'm trying to impress upon you is that in the 13th century, the Dominicans are doing this stuff. In the midst of abject poverty and black death and whatever, okay, the Dominicans are doing this stuff, helping Christians to understand doctrines, helping Christians to refine theology, and they make great contribution to understanding God, understanding the Word, whereas the Franciscans were working hard in caring for the poor, etc. Okay, so that's the late medieval church. When we come back the next time, we'll talk about the dawn of the Reformation, setting the stage for change. Okay, thank you everyone online as well.